Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the East Whiteland Zoning Hearing Board, September 28th, 2020. We have on the agenda this evening one application. This is appeal number 2020-11, the application of Dan and Holly Butcher. I presume the attorneys are here, Kurt?
I am here. Yes.
And your team, the rest of the folks that you want this evening?
Well, let's see. Let me scroll through and make sure I see everyone here. I see Dan and let's see. Tom, are you on?
You're muted, Tom.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, got Tom now. Yes, our two witnesses are here tonight.
Okay. Mr. Holloway, you may then proceed.
Okay.
If Mr. Holloway would like, I can briefly go through the ground rules and thank everybody for their patience. So this is a virtual meeting of the East Whiteland Zoning Hearing Board. The proceedings are being recorded. Mark Haggerty is our court reporter this evening. So if anybody is speaking or testifying or commenting, if you could speak loudly and clearly and not nod or do an aha, it'll help Mr. Haggerty greatly. We have the Zoning Hearing Board tonight. Mr. Hessen is the chair, Karen Milner. Joe Samuel is not with us tonight. Jay Levin and Kathleen Lavenstein are here as alternates, and I understand Kathleen will be the third voting member for this hearing. We have Ted Locker and Zach Barner as well. Ted's the zoning officer. Zach is the director of planning. Ted, did we get any emailed public comment by 5 o'clock today?
I have not seen any.
Okay.
You know, Zach,
So in terms of the broader public comment, in our ad, we've provided two ways to provide public comment. One was via email. It sounds like there has been none. The other is to hear from members of the public who are present and may wish to be heard. I understand that we may have one or two neighbors or people interested in the application. If there is anybody here, I believe Mr. Bradley may be one. Mr. Bradley, are you present?
you're muted.
You may be muted.
Yeah, this is Mr. Bradley. Can you hear me?
Yes, could you give us your full name and where you live?
John Bradley, 337 North Warren Avenue, Malvern, Pennsylvania.
And are you interested in becoming a party to the proceeding, or do you just want to listen or comment?
I emailed a comment. I got a letter in the mail, and it said to email any comments for 5 o'clock to, where's my?
To Mr. Locker, I believe.
Yes, and I did so.
Public comment or?
It was a question. Let me see. I'm trying to remember how I phrased it. I'm sorry. I'm a little discombobulated because I'm trying to make sure my neighbors are also able to get through. There's some technical difficulties. People are having a hard time watching. But since I'm on, I wanted to know about the stormwater plan, the method for collecting the stormwater. Could you explain how that works exactly?
Well, we'll
And
get to
Mr.
that as
Holloway will present his
part of the
testimony and evidence along with his witnesses. The initial question is, so Mr. Bradley, you're saying you're included on the notice list. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're a nearby neighbor?
Yes, I'm catty-cornered to the property. It's under, actually the property is deeded to Tina McQueen. If you're looking at a map, you should be able to see that property. It's next to Walt Fisher's property.
And so in terms of the notice, the notice was sent to Tina L. McQueen, that's 337 North Warren Avenue. What is your relation to Miss McQueen?
Spouse.
Spouse, did you say?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the kind of the threshold question, when the time comes, the board will hear questions from any member of the public who wishes to participate. The threshold question right now is, Mr. Bradley, whether you wish to become a party to the proceedings.
Yes.
Mr. Holloway, is there any objection to Mr. Bradley being a party?
No, no objection.
Okay, so we have Mr. Bradley. He'll be recognized as a party, and we'll have an opportunity to ask questions or present anything that he wishes to present. Is there anybody else on the platform who is not one of Mr. Holloway's witnesses or the zoning hearing board or township who wishes to participate?
Mr. Fisher, is that?
I don't know where he is.
Yeah. We can now see you.
Is that the person identified as, I'm looking at the list,
Walt Fisher.
is that Walt?
I'm Walt Lynn, so I'm the neighbor at the corner at the blacksmith shop.
And could you spell your last name, please?
Sure, of course, Lynn,
And what is your address?
346 North Warren.
And you said you're at the blacksmith shop? We can't hear you. Mr. Lynn?
I'm not saying anything, and I'm hearing myself being repeated several times.
Do you have more than one?
Used to be a blacksmith and a real wheelwright shop in 1750.
Well, we can, I mean, I can hear Mr. Lynn, and if he can hear us, then we're in good shape.
And so, Mr. Lynn, you're saying you're close to the property at 346?
I'm like across the street, more or less. And my neighbors' houses are in front of the new building. And my concern is water runoff, because due to climate change, we're getting, when there's a big rainstorm, we're getting a lot more water down here. And I'm worried that they talk about a plan in their proposal to you, but they haven't actually sat down. It's according to this and actually designed one. And so I'm concerned that you won't have enough information in order to approve it, because they don't have all the information lined up. Secondly, the person that wrote this, the zoning officer, was kind enough to make a comment that I think is appropriate.
And Mr.
Whoever the person was, I can't read the signature, but
Sir, we'll give you a chance to ask all those questions.
okay.
The threshold question right now is whether you just wish to provide comment as a member of the public, or do you wish to become a party to the proceedings? And with party status, that means you can ask questions, but you could also present testimony and evidence if you wished. It will likely give you a greater right to appeal.
I apologize if I didn't hear what you said earlier, but there's like on my screen, there's 5 people talking at once.
Mr. Lynn, do you by chance have the live stream open from the township website?
I'm sorry. Say again.
Do you by chance have the live stream open from the township website?
Yes.
If you could close that, it may reduce the feedback. That's on a delay, so sometimes when people leave it open, it all kind of ruminates.
Does somebody have a TV on?
If other than Mr. Lynn and Mr. Holloway, if anyone who's not about to speak can mute their microphone, that may help too.
And we can come back to Mr. Fisher a bit later if he wants to be party. We figured that, let him work out his volume and sound for this thing. So why don't we proceed with this at this point, Andrew?
Okay, Mr. Holloway, you can reserve your right to objecting to Mr. Lynn. We'll see what he wants to do and what his position is when
All right, thank you,
after
Mr.
we hear your presentation. So, Mr. Holloway, if you'd like, if you want to identify both of your witnesses, and why don't we have them sworn up front? And then the board can hear your presentation as an offer of proof, but also take any Q&A from the board.
All right, very good. The two witnesses that will be presenting tonight are Dan Butcher, one of the applicants, and Thomas Smith, the engineer hired by Dan and Holly Butcher to prepare the plan and design all the stormwater systems and set forth the subdivision.
All right, so why don't we have them both sworn by Mr. Haggerty?
I ask you both to raise your right hand for me, please. Swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. I do.
And you may proceed. Mr. Barner has, he has the application handy. He has your highlighted revised sketch handy. And I believe he also has the county GIS map if that's helpful too to the board or to the participants.
Are you ready for me to, me to
Yes.
proceed?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rao. So before I have the present the witnesses for testimony, I'd like to just relay to the board. Of course, as you know, we're presenting this as an offer. We presented an offer of proof to the board tonight. The offer of proof is submitted to the board for two purposes. As a summary of the first purpose is as a summary of the applicant's evidence and legal argument. And the second purpose is to offer into evidence the 6 documents identified in the offer of proof as A1 through A6. I will have both witnesses verify that the information, pardon me, that the information contained in the offer of proof in the zoning application itself and in the plan are true and correct to the best of their knowledge, information, and belief. Before I have the witnesses do that, I would just like to make a note also to the board that one of the variances that the applicants have requested tonight is a variance to ordinance section 200-57F3, which requires conditional use approval for the construction of stormwater infiltration bed in a steep slope. So the sole purpose for the conditional use hearing would be because the plan proposes to put the stormwater infiltration bed that is part of the stormwater management system in an area of steep slope. So we're asking the zoning hearing board to consider granting a variance to the applicant for having to go for a conditional use approval. And for that purpose, we have set forth in the application itself all of the proof that the applicant would put forth at a conditional use hearing in front of the Board of Supervisors. That is fully detailed in the zoning application. We've submitted, I should also mention that we've submitted this as an offer of proof because you'll note that the narrative in the applicant's application is very extensive. We not only addressed the variance sections of the ordinance, but also all other provisions of the zoning ordinance that are required to be addressed as part of this proceeding. So,
Mr. Holloway, this might be a good time. You're referencing your exhibits. Why don't I just briefly go through the exhibits that the board has in hand, and you can tell us whether any are missing. And I'll also quickly do the board procedural exhibits then as well.
Very good.
So what we have from the applicant is Exhibit A1, which is the revised zoning hearing application. It's dated July 24, 2020, revised September 3, 2020. Exhibit A2 is a zoning sketch dated 3/26/2020, last revised 9/2/2020. Exhibit A3 is Mr. Holloway's affidavit indicating he sent written notice to property owners on a mailing list, which he has provided. Exhibit A4 is the recorded July 8, 2013 deed in which the applicants acquired the title to the property. Exhibit A5 is the CV of Mr. Smith for his engineering services. And Exhibit A6 is a supplemental piece regarding man-made slopes and stormwater management that's prepared by Mr. Smith. And then just very briefly, so we have all of it for the record. The board exhibits are Exhibit B1, that's the zoning hearing board application dated July 24, 2020. Exhibit B2 is the applicant's 60-day extension letter to Mr. Locker that's dated August 11, 2020. And that extension indicates that the hearing is able to commence before the end of the month. And then Exhibit B3 is the revised application, which Mr. Holloway also has his exhibits. Exhibit B4 is the proof of publication, that's on reserve, but this was advertised on September 14 and September 21. Exhibit B5 is the staff affidavit of posting, and the property was posted on September 14. And then Exhibit B6 is my correspondence to the applicants, setting forth the applicant's notice responsibilities and acknowledging the date of hearing. So I'd ask briefly, Mr. Holloway, you had given, or the butchers had given an extension until September 30th to commence the hearing. So applicant's counsel agrees that this is a timely hearing that's being conducted tonight.
That is correct, Mr. Rao.
Okay. All right, so those are all the exhibits. The board has all of those. I mentioned Mr. Barner can put up exhibits as you wish, but if you want to proceed with your offer of proof, the board will hear it.
The board has received the offer of proof. Mr. Rao, would you recommend that I read through the testimony of that, or will the board take notice of the fact that it already has all of that information? I think the board can take notice of it. I think what would probably be most helpful to the board, and I'm sure the neighbor participants, is a general overview of what your clients want to do and why, and the variance pieces of relief that they need. Okay, very good.
This is Dave Hessen, and for the benefit of Mr. Bradley and Mr. Fisher, the way this is going to work is the applicant's going to present information, and then each of the persons presenting here from the application will be questioned by the board, and then I will open it up for questions from the audience, Mr. Fisher, Mr. Bradley, if you have a question regarding anything that was said. And so each of the witnesses will go through. The board asks questions first, and then I'll open it up if you have a question. Okay? Proceed, Mr. Holloway.
All right. Thank you, board members. The first witness I'll call then is Dan Butcher. And Mr. Butcher, you've already been sworn to provide truthful testimony. So let me ask you this question. Do you swear that the proof of the offer of proof, the application that you submitted, and the plan that you submitted are true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, I do.
All right. Mr. Butcher, you're the owner, you and your wife are the owner of 20 Old Lancaster Road, Malvern, PA. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's the subject property for this application, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So briefly describe what you're intending here. What is this plan all about?
So basically, we want to take the lot we have and subdivide it into 2 lots, understanding that, you know, we need the variance for the steep slopes, but otherwise we comply is my general high level understanding of what's going on.
All right, very good. I will have, and Mr. Butcher, I'll have Mr. Smith testify momentarily as to further details about the plan. So your proposal is simply to subdivide your 1 lot into 2 lots. Is it your understanding that you have sufficient square footage of the lot you have now to create 2 lawful lots?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is it your understanding that the restriction that you face for which you need the variances is a restriction on constructing any type of residence on steep slopes?
Yes, it is.
Do you understand that there's also a restriction about constructing any stormwater management systems within a steep slope?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I think those are the basics of what I would have Mr. Butcher testify to. Mr. Smith can provide far more detail. So unless there's questions for Mr. Smith, for Mr. Butcher about those items that I have had him present testimony on, then I'll call our next witness.
Just one question. So as of this moment, the lot is not subdivided. You have the entire piece of property is not subdivided.
Mr. Butcher, that question is directed to you. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry about that. Yes, that is my understanding.
Well, do you understand, Mr. Holloway? I mean, it's not subdivided at the moment.
Correct.
Correct, right? And so you went to the supervisors and asked them to subdivide it.
Well, if I can clarify, Mr. Hanson, we're actually in the preliminary stage of that, seeking variances to determine whether we can file a full-fledged subdivision plan. The zoning sketch plan proposes a subdivision, but we have not gone through any process for the subdivision beyond requesting this zoning relief.
Okay. So has there been comment from either the supervisors or the planning commission relevant to this property at the moment?
Mr. Butcher, you were present for both the planning commission meeting when they reviewed and discussed the plan, and also the Board of Supervisors meeting when they reviewed and discussed the plan. Can you respond to that question? What kind of comments do you recall?
Yeah, so the comments were for the Board of Supervisors are relatively just kind of procedural, I felt, and more so for the board of, or for the other board, the planning commission, they had some comments around things they'd like to see adjusted on the plan, and Mr. Smith has made those recommendations, at least made an attempt to do that, and I'll let him comment on that. So both of them have heard or seen this plan in some unrevised state. So they did not oppose. They basically allowed it to proceed to the zoning board to consider the zoning relief we're requesting.
Karen, do you have any questions for Mr. Butcher? Kathleen, Jay?
This is Kathy. I just had one. I was curious what you intend to do with the second lot. What's the purpose of the subdivision?
So the intent is to subdivide the lot and sell it.
Are you going to be responsible for building a house on it before you sell it? So you're gonna do that and then sell the land and a new residence?
Right, the current plan, I'm not saying that's off the table, but the current plan is to simply sell the lot to a builder to build, or to a homeowner, whoever wants to buy the lot for the purpose of building a home that meets the criteria that we're seeking approval for, and along with the stormwater management of that.
Okay, so the plan then that I'm looking at now on the screen is just your proposal, but that's not something that has yet been committed to by anybody?
So if I could
Sure.
jump in a second just to clarify. So yes, the plan that you're seeing tonight is simply a zoning sketch plan setting forth the basic sizes of the two lots that would come out of the result of a subdivision of the one lot. If the zoning variances are approved by the zoning hearing board tonight, then Mr. Butcher, in conjunction with Mr. Smith, would go through the full land development and subdivision process, which would involve a great more detail for the plan, involve a number of comment review sessions by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And at the end result, hopefully a subdivision would be approved. But without the zoning variances, there's no ability to move forward with those steps. Was that responsive to your question?
It was. I think I'm now going to want to hear from your next witness a little bit more about how that's actually going to, what that's actually going to mean. So,
Absolutely.
But I get the answer.
Absolutely.
Mr. Holloway, just two quick questions from me. One is, although this is conceptual, you have a very specific chart with disturbance numbers, both from your original application and your revised application. You're requesting that the board provide relief based on that chart. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
So that you wouldn't be able to go beyond those numbers if the board were to find that they were persuasive.
That is correct. So,
and then the second quick question is, you mentioned, and when I was looking at the application, your 257 F as in Frank 3 relief is a little unorthodox in that you're asking this board, the zoning hearing board, to grant a variance so that the applicant does not have to go to the Board of Supervisors for a conditional use. Did the board, whether you know or maybe your client, Mr. Butcher, knows, did the Board of Supervisors or the Planning Commission opine on how they felt about that?
Mr. Butcher, I'll defer to you since I did not attend that meeting. Did you hear anything from the Board of Supervisors at its meeting specifically about the request for a variance to avoid having to go for a conditional use hearing?
So I'm going to speak in lay terms, and I guess I really should probably say I don't really know the answer to that, but my understanding was that that's what they were acting on, that's what we requested them to hear. I thought that's what they were hearing and acting upon. So Mr. Smith may be able to answer that question better than I am more technically, but that is my lay understanding of what had happened.
All right. Do you recall the Board of Supervisors taking a vote to oppose your zoning application?
They took a vote to propose. They had three options on the table, I guess. One was to oppose, one was to support, and one was to, whatever the other word was, basically let it go through the process for the zoning board, whatever that technical word is, and that's the one they chose, is to not support and not oppose.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Butcher.
Karen, Jay, any questions for Mr. Butcher?
I have none. Kathleen asked mine.
Okay. Mr. Bradley, Mr. Fisher, do you have any questions for Mr. Butcher?
No.
Dave, I finally unmuted. Can you hear me?
Now we hear you.
Okay, I just following up on what Andrew was asking, because I'm really having a hard time wrapping my mind around it. Really legally, I've never heard of anyone getting a variance so you didn't have to get a conditional use if the ordinance says you have to get a conditional use. So I guess the question is really for the attorneys, for Andrew or Mr. Holloway, to explain how that exactly can work.
Well, this is Mr. Holloway. I would submit to you that the zoning hearing board does have the power to grant variances to the ordinance, and that includes a variance for this particular section number. So if the zoning hearing board were to agree to grant that variance, it is our legal position that this board does have the authority to do so. So what we did in order to give your board the ability to consider whether that was appropriate action was to set out in the zoning application in detail all of the information that would be presented for the purpose of seeking a conditional use hearing, seeking conditional use approval, I should say. Now, let me note that the sole reason required under section 200-57F3 for requiring a conditional use approval is for construction of the stormwater infiltration bed in the steep slopes. It is only that narrow piece of proposed development that requires the conditional use. It is not the construction of the house, the driveway, any of the other development features. So it is our position that your board has the legal authority to grant the variance if it elects to do so.
And I get what you're saying, that that's the only, it's just for the stormwater management bed. But I think the first thing you said was that the ordinance provides for a variance for that. And that's what I'm not seeing. All I'm seeing is you have to get a conditional use for that. So
No,
where are you looking?
I did not know. I'm sorry. If you interpret my words to mean that the ordinance provides for that, that is incorrect. The ordinance doesn't say anything about you are able to get a variance for that. I am stating that as a legal opinion, it is my opinion that your board has the authority to grant a variance to any provisions of the zoning ordinance of East Whiteland Township. That authority is set forth in the municipality's planning code. And that would include the power and authority to grant a variance to that particular section. And I would ask the zoning hearing board to take note that this application was in fact already reviewed by the Board of Supervisors of the township, and they chose not to oppose any of the variance requests.
So just so I understand, so are you saying that anytime the zoning ordinance provides for the conditional use process, that our board can override that?
That is correct. That is what I'm saying. The applicant can apply to your board for a variance from that section.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And for the board, that may be something that you're not prepared to answer in real time tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in what you have to say, Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, yeah, we'd like, there's a little bit of research on your part might be
Yeah.
critical for this, and you can't do it right now.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Holloway, yeah, your next witness up?
All right, very good. Next witness will be Thomas Smith. Mr. Smith, you prepared the zoning sketch plan that was submitted along with the application. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
All right. Is all of the information in that zoning sketch plan accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it is.
Okay. You did all the calculations for square footage of the lot subdivision, all of the calculations for the steep slope intrusions, et cetera. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Likewise, Mr. Smith, in preparation for this case, did you provide a significant amount of the narration that went into the application for zoning relief?
Yes, I did.
And is all of the and you've read the entire zoning application, is that correct?
Yes, I have.
Is all of the information that's contained within the application for zoning relief true and correct and accurate to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, it is. There was one question, though, that was raised about the numbers, and I would like to make it clear that we do not have a detailed house plan. We do not have a builder. We do not have a property owner or a buyer for this house. We did the best that we could to put together a plan that would represent a buildable type construction, taking into account proper grading, proper stormwater management, and the like. And I would like to qualify all these numbers by saying that we intend to do what's shown on the plan in substantial conformance with what's on the plan. However, if we show that we're going to do a 1,360 square foot house, it may turn out to be 1,350 or 1,370 square feet. And the disturbances that are shown on the plan could vary very slightly. And of course, if we do succeed at this point with the zoning hearing board, we will have to prepare a detailed subdivision plan with grading and stormwater calculations and infiltration testing and things of that nature that will be subject to the review by all the township consultants and their agencies. And by the time we get to the end of that process, things could change a slight amount. So what I'm asking for is that we would intend to build in substantial conformance with this, but I would hope that the board would not hold us to exact numbers to the square foot on the limits of disturbance. I'm not sure how we do that, but I think based on.
Mr. Smith, let me interrupt you for 1 second now. Let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
So, you're suggesting that as calculations, as you go through the land development subdivision process, calculations could change slightly. Is that your testimony?
Exactly.
And you're suggesting that it would be prudent for the applicant to ask the board to consider, if it will grant a variance, to consider a slight deviation in steep slope disturbance numbers. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let's try to quantify that for the board, because I'm sure all the board members right now are scratching their heads over that idea.
Okay.
We've proposed numbers on this plan and information in the application that are very specific, as Mr. Rao pointed out earlier.
Yes, and fortunately or unfortunately, with the computer age using CAD design, we can calculate disturbance to the 100th of a square foot or even more accurate than that. And also that means if we would move a line on the plan, the width of the line, it could change the square footage of disturbance a small amount as well. So, I mean, within the realm of accuracy, we've come up with a dwelling and all the things that we believe would be needed to develop this house. We're just asking that I think substantial conformance is probably the best way to put this.
Well, let's see if we can't clarify that even further for the board.
Okay.
So, given what you know about the property presently and about the design that's been proposed and the calculations that you've done, what do you feel? I'll ask you to respond in a percentage term. What do you feel is minimal and reasonable if we were to ask the board for some leeway, as it were, to the specific numbers that are set forth herein? How would you classify that in a percentage? Would it be, so for instance, would it be a 5% deviation, or what are you thinking here, Mr. Smith?
Sure. Well, for instance, in the very steep slope areas that we're disturbing, and most of those or all of those actually, in my opinion, are man-made steep slopes. They were created by either the development of the property as a whole or adjacent to it with the roadway. There would be, there's 9,400 there's 1,904 square feet of disturbed very steep slopes. So even 10% of that would be 190 square feet, which would be about the amount of a very small shed, 10 by 20 or so, or average size shed, I would say. So I'd say in the 5 to 10% range is reasonable in that regard. There are more regular steep slopes on the site. There's almost 10,000 square feet, 9,483 square feet being disturbed. And 10% of that would be 950 square feet. I can't see that our disturbance of steep slopes would need another 1,000 square feet. So I'd say because of the size and the amount of the steep slopes versus very steep, 5% would certainly give a certain good margin of error or reasonableness, I would say.
All right. So,
Mr. Smith, it's Andy Rao. Just a quick question on that.
Sure.
Just so we're all clear on the chart that's in your revised application. As I understand it, the steep slopes are 9,483 square feet.
Correct.
But the disturbed steep slopes are proposed at 4,206. Is that right?
You're right. I'm sorry, I stand corrected.
And then with the very steep slopes, your current proposal for lot 2 is 1,904 square feet.
Total.
And you're proposing to disturb 507 square feet.
Right.
And so
based
the percentage that you're proposing here is 5% leeway on the disturbed numbers.
Yeah, on the disturbed number, 5% on the steep slopes would be reasonable, and maybe 10% on the very steep, because that's only 50 square feet. But we really don't see any real disturbance of very steep slopes other than those that were created when the shed was put on the property and the grading was done behind the existing dwelling and along the driveway.
and I'm not speaking for the board at all. I would only say that in my experience, the board is usually presented with a number, a not to exceed number. So you're suggesting those numbers on the chart, but you're looking for 5 to 10% of leeway in addition.
I would say as long as the plan looks similar to what we have there. Typically, houses aren't just a square box. They usually have some areas that jut in and out, bulge in and out, chimneys, things of that nature. We don't know that what that 100% would be, what the final house configuration would be, but it might affect those numbers a little bit. That's all I'm saying.
So you're saying up from 5 to 10%. Is that correct, Mr.
Yeah,
Smith?
I would say we wouldn't need more than that.
All right, very good. Now, let me ask you this, Mr. Smith. So if the board were so inclined to grant the variances and also grant the variances with a potential for a 5 to 10%, 5% increase disturbance of the steep slopes and up to 10% disturbance of the very steep slopes, if the board were prepared to grant that, is lot 2, which is the new lot, sufficient in size to adjust, for instance, the stormwater infiltration bed to be able to handle that increase in size?
Yes, I believe that it will.
All right. So why don't we use that as a segue then to addressing the question of what measures are being put forth in this application and plan for stormwater management?
Yes. Well, first, all the water from the roof area on the proposed dwelling will be piped into the underground recharge bed.
And where will it go from there? Where does the underground recharge bed, what does it do, and where does that water go?
That water is piped into the bed. It's distributed through perforated pipes throughout the bed, which is approximately 40 feet long, 19 feet wide, 4 feet of rock under a foot of cover. It'll be distributed through perforated pipes, and most of the water will be infiltrated. There will be a provision for infiltration, groundwater quality, water quality, and also will do peak rate control as required by the township's ordinance.
Okay, but Mr. Smith, let me stop you there before you get too technical.
Okay.
So it's designed to then allow the water that enters the bed to infiltrate down into the soils beneath. Is that correct?
Primarily, yes.
Okay, so you say primarily. So whatever doesn't percolate down, where does it go?
It will discharge out toward the road in an extreme event as to maintain the peak flows from the site as it would be in the pre-developed condition.
All right. So let me ask you this question, Mr. Smith. Where did you come up with the design for the infiltration bed? Is that something of your own design?
Yes.
Okay. And
I did some preliminary calculations to determine, based on the amount of disturbance, the amount of impervious coverage, and the amount of drainage going to it, what size would be needed. Final testing and design, of course, would have to be done during the subdivision process.
does that design comply with the provisions of the township's stormwater ordinance and land development ordinance?
Yes, it will.
Okay. Did you take that into consideration in designing the infiltration bed?
Absolutely.
Okay. Will the construction of the not only the bed, but the other stormwater features, which I'll allow you to talk about in a minute, also be subject to review and approval and revision by comment by both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors if this process moves forward?
Yes, it will.
Okay. All right. So a moment ago, Mr. Smith, I interrupted you when you were talking about how the waters will get into the bed. Then I asked you to explain what happens once it gets into the bed. You had explained about the downspouts coming off the roof. So I think you were about to explain about other runoff from the property and how that would be managed. Would you go ahead and do that, please?
Yeah, we're going to use the existing driveway, so we won't need to add additional driveway except up near the house, where we'll provide a turnaround area and parking. The intent of this is to have a 2-car garage underneath the dwelling with 2 stories above it. So the new water generated by that little part of the driveway and parking turnaround, that'll be also collected in a 24-inch concrete inlet, and that will be part of the piping system that also goes into the underground recharge bed. So
before you continue with that, Mr. Smith, just want to clarify a point. When you say use the existing driveway, so you've proposed a shared driveway between lots 1 and the proposed new lot 2. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So that addresses the driveway water. What other stormwater runoff provisions have you designed for?
Well, the areas that'll be disturbed that won't be either covered by building or roof will be stabilized with erosion control matting, will be properly stabilized with seed and mulch.
Okay.
And the limit of disturbance is shown on the plan as about 8,850 square feet. The remaining part of the site will be protected from disturbance.
Okay. So Mr. Smith, let's talk now for a second about the variance requests that are in the application.
Yes.
All right. So there's a variance request to section 257C6.
Yes.
And that variance request is because under that section, a house can't be built in a steep slope area. Is that correct? You cannot disturb a steep slope to build a house in the township.
Well, C6 only applies to existing dwellings and not any new ones.
Meaning existing dwellings are permitted, but no new ones, correct?
That's correct. And D1 is basically saying the same thing, only it's prohibiting any other structures.
Okay. So now you're talking about the second variance request, or about section, 257D, which I guess more or less would be read in conjunction with 57C6. And that is the prohibition of any uses in areas of steep slopes, which includes a prohibition of even the modestly designed house in this plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And specifically, we've asked for a variance to 57D1, which says that structures other than permitted uses in steep slopes are not permitted. They are prohibited. Is that correct?
Correct.
What types of, so could this lot be, if no dwelling, no sort of structure was proposed for lot 2, is it your interpretation of the ordinance that Mr. and Mrs. Butcher's property could be subdivided as long as they didn't build anything on lot 2.
Correct.
And at this juncture, I guess I'll pause for a second. And because we've introduced Mr. Smith's curriculum vitae, showing his vast experience in the area of planning, I would ask the board to consider granting Mr. Smith expert witness status.
Andrew, do you have a copy of that? I don't see it in our package.
It's in the second packet, which is Mr. Holloway's offer of proof packet, and it's Exhibit A5.
Yeah, I'm
And
not sure. We don't-
Zach may be able to pull it up here for us.
If I could comment also, I have over 40 some years of extensive stormwater management experience, including teaching at Penn State, Pennsylvania Society of Land Surveyors, and so forth. And I think stormwater management seems to be what everyone's interested in as well. That's it.
You're almost there, Zach. It's just after the deed.
He's got
That's
it.
it.
There you go.
Unless any of the board members have objections, this looks good to me.
No objection.
Andrew,
So
we're good.
Mr. Smith is recognized then, unless there's objection, as a professional engineer with experience in stormwater management.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. So, Mr. Smith, so there, we had basically 5 variance requests in the application, correct?
Yes,
And the first 2 of those variance requests we've just talked about. Those 2 sections we flagged as sections that would not permit a dwelling or any structure really to be constructed on the proposed lot 2, correct?
that's right.
Okay. So that goes really to the heart of the matter. You know, we can create a lot, but we can't do anything with it.
Right.
Pretty much sum it up.
That's true. And I think the next 2 that you're going to ask about really are not applicable, but I think being cautionary. You can't build a structure without doing cut and fill, and you can't do it without at least temporarily removing topsoil. So that's
Okay.
why we revised the application to say they were if necessary.
Okay, so so you're referring to the variance request of 200-57D2 called cut and fill.
Yes,
That's prohibited in a steep
Yes.
slope. Is that correct?
other than in conjunctions allowed in permitted sections, yes.
Right. But what is your opinion regarding whether any cut and fill will be necessary in connection with development of lot 2 if it is subdivided?
Sure. I mean, to construct anything on the property involves excavation and or fill, cut and fill. However, I believe that that's part of the construction of the house, driveway, and so forth. It's not per se a cut and fill operation where we would just go in and grade the whole property just to create a flat or a steep area.
Okay. So when you say as if necessary, be as required for the construction of the improvements.
That's right.
Okay. Well, how about the variance request to section 257D4, removal of topsoil? Is it the intent to remove topsoil from the site?
No. We would need to remove topsoil where we would be placing paving and the structures. But again, we're not removing topsoil just for the sake of removing topsoil. We'll attempt to replace any topsoil that's removed in the areas that are shown as being disturbed and stabilized.
Is topsoil typically stockpiled first
Yeah.
for reuse after, upon for final grading?
It is, yes.
Okay. So item number 3, variance request number 3 and 4 have to do with the activities that would be created in order to build the proposed 1,340, I believe it is, square foot house.
1360 square foot footprint, yes.
1360, thank you.
Yes.
And then the 5th variance is the one that I addressed earlier, which is the variance request to asking the board to allow or to say, to give a variance requiring the applicant to not have to get conditional use approval, correct?
That's correct. And the reasoning for that is that the criteria set forth in the zoning ordinance for approval of the conditional use are identical to those that would require a variance. So we're really not asking to forget about the whole thing. What we're saying is we would meet all of the criteria under the conditional use approval, but we're requesting the zoning hearing board hear it and grant the approval because the construction of the storm basin is really no different than constructing the house or the driveway or any of the other improvements. It's only for stormwater detention, stormwater management facilities that are regulated by conditional use.
Yeah. And if the zoning hearing board were to decide not to grant a variance to that conditional use, and that, let me strike that question. The conditional use is necessary because of the placement of the stormwater bed. Is that correct? The recharge bed.
Yes, and it's just a tiny bit of disturbance of steep slopes, no very steep slopes for the storm bed.
And when you say tiny bit, what is the tiny bit?
303 square feet. And the bed disturbance is about 1,200 altogether.
Okay. So those numbers are the ones that apply to what for the conditional use approval. Is that correct?
Yes, and maybe I should explain the plan just a little bit. The very dark shaded areas on lot 2 are the very steep slopes, over 25%. The light shaded, the light gray shaded areas are the steep slopes, which are 15 to 25%. And then the white areas are not steep slopes. They're less than 15%. So if you take a look at where that recharge bed or infiltration bed is sited, the majority of that area is not in a steep slope. Just a small amount of those light shaded gray areas are affected by that.
Mr. Smith, let me interrupt you for a second. Thank you for explaining that. For anyone who has any difficulty interpreting the plan, describe where the proposed new house is shown on lot 2. Describe what it looks like.
And could you use, for the benefit of the recorder, could you use north, south, east, and west?
Sure.
And what we're looking at also for the record, this is exhibit A2, which is the revised sketch. And I believe it's also part and parcel of exhibit B3, which is the revised ZHB application.
Yes. Well, let's assume for all intents and purposes that the way what you're looking at now on the screen, north is straight up. So the lot number 2 is almost like a K shape with an angle point near the existing driveway on lot 1. The house would be placed near the southern end of the house or the lot, about 30 feet off the rear property line. It is going to be angled slightly to fit within the building envelope. And the structure that's shown there, north to south, I'll call it, the depth of the house is 40 feet, that's shown, and the width is 34 feet, that's shown.
Where is the stormwater infiltration bed shown, Mr. Smith?
The infiltration bed is shown near the north end of the site, just south of the very steep slope areas that represents the embankment along Old Lancaster Pike.
Okay. Was there anything further you wanted to describe about the plan for the board?
Just essentially the last thing are the utilities, and they will be going up along the side of the driveway, water, sewer, electric. They will be going up the side of the shared driveway. Existing driveway will not need to be disturbed or excavated, so no steep slopes there would be disturbed except for the utilities, which would be put back exactly. The surface would be restored to what it was before.
Very good. And so in the application itself, you set forth in detail, did you not, the proposal for how the design would occur for stormwater management and to minimize the effects of disturbance of the steep slopes. Is that correct?
Yes, we did.
Okay. I have no other questions for Mr. Smith at this time.
Mr. Smith, this is Mr. Hessen. I have a question for you in regards. Well, there's kind of two questions. One, you commented that whoever bought if we subdivided this, if we gave you variances, whoever had to do this would do this according to roughly within 5 to 10% your plan. But that's not a requirement, really. If Mr. Butcher sells this as a lot, the next fellow comes in and says, "Nah, I don't like that rectangular spot. You know, I'm going to do something different." In the meantime, we've granted a variance that allowed the lot to be subdivided, and we're off to the races with a new kind of design and plan for something here. So, am I correct in saying that if the lot gets sold with nothing built on it, the new person comes in and says, "Nah, I don't want to do this. We'll do something different"?
I think that any decision that you would make would have to show that it's in substantial conformance with that. And if they were going to build a house that was twice as big and it disturbed twice the amount of steep slopes, I believe they would have to go back to the zoning hearing board for relief again. I think the proof here would be that we would need during the subdivision process to come up with a plan that shows proper stormwater management, and that's all going to hinge on what's being proposed in terms of the total disturbance, the total impervious, and the way the site will be graded and so forth.
Right. And Mr. Hessen, this is Mr. Holloway again, if I could add to Mr. Smith's comments, answers to your question, which I think really gets into a legal decision. I completely agree with him that if your board grants variances that are being requested, and even if if you would allow a deviation that Mr. Smith outlined, no matter what happens, so first of all, our contention is this property could be subdivided without variances as long as we didn't propose to build anything on the second lot. And that would mean nobody ever gets to build anything on the second lot without coming back to your board. And if you grant variances to what we have proposed with the size house and the size bed and the disturbances that we have proposed, that is all that's allowed at that point in time. If someone comes back and increases the design or increases the disturbance is probably the better way to say it, by virtue of a different design, then it would certainly be within the province of your building inspectors to say, no, we won't give you a permit for that until you go and get zoning variances, because what you're proposing is not or has not already been granted a variance for relief. So it's not an uncontrolled situation. We are setting forth the numbers and saying these are the numbers. If the board would be willing to grant an upward of 5 to 10% deviation, that would be very helpful in terms of ultimate design. But beyond that point, that doesn't grant anyone carte blanche to come in and change this in a way that disturbs more steep slopes than you've authorized.
Right. Well, then the second question part of this thing is this the only spot on that potential second lot that disturbs the least amount of very steep slope and steep slope for the property in totality? I mean, if you, and just trivially, if we move this thing to the north, back or more towards the right of way, around the top of the K, for example, and there seems to be a great deal of white up there. Is that does that location work in any way?
I've looked at this pretty much in a lot of detail, looking at different alternatives, different structures. We have quite a big area behind the house that's not steep slopes that would be suitable for a patio and that type of development. We also looked at whether these slopes that are out there are man-made or natural steep slopes. And the area where the existing or the proposed dwelling is, we believe was man-made when Dan's house was originally built, and also the shed that was put in there recently. On our existing features plan that we we did overlay that shed on there, and that's why that area is very steeply graded. So we also have to have a usable area for the driveway turnaround and parking. And I believe what we've shown is fair and reasonable and represents the minimum amount of relief that we would need to develop the property.
Where's this shed you're talking about? I'm just curious.
The shed is very close to near the front corner of the proposed dwelling.
And that's on lot number 2 as opposed to lot number 1, right?
It is, yes, which will be removed.
Karen, questions? Kathleen, Jay?
I have 2 questions. I'm sure the first one is obvious, but you were saying that you could subdivide it now. You don't need any variances. So I assume the reason you want to get the variances is so the property will be more valuable when you go to sell it.
Well,
Well, actually, it's a question for Mr. Butcher. I think if I could have that redirected to him.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and I would like to call him back again anyway, but before I do, is there any further questions for Mr. Smith?
I don't know if it's necessarily for Mr. Smith. It's back to the same question about the kind of what I asked before about the conditional use and the variance and how the interplay between them. So is the reason you don't want to go through the conditional use process for the stormwater management just because it's one more step and it's expensive? Because I think you've said that you have to go back to the planning commission anyway and to the board of supervisors anyway.
Okay.
But is it kind of just to streamline things, or is there something else I'm missing?
If you allow me to respond, I can probably respond to that actually better even than Mr. Butcher.
Yeah.
Conditional use requires a separate hearing before the board of supervisors.
Oh, yeah.
So
The board is very familiar with
Yeah,
the
we're
legal
familiar.
regime in the township, so we
Okay.
don't have to build the house, just we're in a room. The question I think is that Karen is asking is,
It's cost.
what is the hardship? What is the variance theory?
It's the cost.
Yeah.
It's the cost of going through a second hearing.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
That would be the hardship. That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I try and answer that too?
I think the board understands that answer. I think the first question was not, I think Mr. Holloway was going to have Mr. Butcher
Yeah.
answer the reason for doing this now all at once instead of just subdividing.
Yeah, so I think it's basically,
Mr. Butcher, before you begin, I'm sorry, I just want to ask, complete things with Mr. Smith as far as my questioning. So, Mr. Smith, you've reviewed the assertions in the application and in the offer of proof regarding the hardship and why these variances we believe should be granted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you agree with all of the assertions made in both the offer of proof and the application in terms of addressing the legal requirements for the granting of a variance?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Holloway, I mean, we got questions that may go back and forth between Mr. Butcher and Mr. Smith at this time. So we're not excusing him completely here from coming back. The board may yet have further questions.
Understood.
Okay. And then eventually the audience.
Okay. Well, let me then just put Mr. Butcher back.
So there's an outstanding question to Mr. Butcher, which is why not just subdivide?
Right.
So he can answer that question.
yeah, I contemplated which was the best way to go about it. Look at all the options, and I felt this was the best option. If we subdivide and then you don't get the variance to build on it, then you've effectively wasted the money, right? It's a sunk cost that you've wasted the money that you can't get the return on that, right? And also doing it this way does allow me the flexibility if I find myself in a position to be able to do the build, right? That I have that option, and whether I would want to make that my primary residence or not. So there's just a lot of things at play, kind of weighing in on that decision. I felt after discussion with Kurt and with Tom, the best way to go forward. So.
Thank you.
And I think that gets back to Karen's question though, but I don't know if, in that respect, it was answered as to what's the hardship here?
So Mr. Butcher, let me direct you to the offer of proof and the summary of testimony that you and I discussed that went into of your testimony that went into the offer of proof. Does that summary of your testimony lay out, in your opinion, the hardship that is imposed on on this property as a result of the existence of the steep slopes?
Yes, it does.
Okay. If the board would like, I'd be happy to walk Mr. Butcher through those points under his testimony under the offer of proof, but it is laid out fully in the offer itself.
I think the board understands it. I guess I think they understand that you have one lot, you'd like to make two. And I think Mr. Holloway's legal argument, which the board would have to consider, is that the hardship, the asserted hardship, is that you could not develop lot two without the incursion into the steep slope. So the board's question is, which is the chicken and which is the egg ultimately? That, and I guess maybe this is a question for Mr. Butcher then, is, are you currently living in the main or the only dwelling on the property?
Yes.
So, Mr. Holloway, your argument is not that house is uninhabitable and you have to create a second home to make the entire property economically useful.
That is correct. We're saying based on the size of Mr. Butcher's current property, he could subdivide this property and create two smaller lots that would fit all the dimensional requirements of the ordinance. But what the ordinance prohibits, because of the existence of the steep slopes, the ordinance prohibits the construction of any dwelling on this new lot. So it effectively denies a reasonable use of lot two once you've created it. You create the lot, but you can't do anything with it. And that's all. And the hardship is the existence of the steep slopes and about which the ordinance says, well, you can't disturb them to build any kind of house, even a house that's only 1,360 square feet.
So, Mr. Holloway, but I kind of understand that the concept of what the ordinance is not to build on steep slopes, period. And because you have steep slopes on your property, and you want to build on them, okay, that's the ordinance says you can't. I mean, it's not I'll defer to Mr. Rao eventually to describe to me how that is a hardship. But the ordinance itself of being standing alone that requires you not to, says you cannot build on steep slopes, is not a hardship. So I'll ask Mr. Rao to opine on that at maybe a different moment, but just my opinion. Karen, Kathleen, any more questions of Mr. Butcher at this time, or Mr. Smith? Members of the audience, Mr. Bradley or Mr. Fisher, do you have questions of Mr. Smith at this time in regards to the plan?
Mr. Hessen, if you'd like, I think if you start with Mr. Bradley, he's at 337 North Warren. He's the spouse. He has stated he's the spouse of Tina McQueen. He's the party so far.
Okay, he's on the
Mr.
corner.
Holloway did not object. So
the southern corner. Yeah.
No, I don't have any questions. The more I listen, the more concerned I become. The ordinance says you can't build on steep slopes for a good reason.
Mr. Bradley, why don't we do this real quick?
Sure.
So if you have questions for the witnesses,
I have
that's
no
fine. If you have more of a statement,
I can make
really your own
later.
testimony, and that's fine. But why don't we have you sworn by Mr. Haggerty, just in case it's a blend of testimony and questions.
Okay.
So Mr. Haggerty will swear you in momentarily.
You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, you can proceed.
Well, I don't have questions. I think I've heard all that I any questions that I have, I think have been answered as far as from Mr. Butcher or his lawyer. Can I make a statement now or should I make a statement later?
You could do it now if that's okay with the chair.
Now it's fine. Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I'm listening to the questions that the board's asked, and it makes me concerned. The ordinance says you can't build on steep slopes, and there's a good reason you can't do that. And I don't think we've heard a good enough reason to grant a variance. The hardship doesn't seem to be adequate, and it also I don't know the legal ins and outs of all this, but I'm beginning to think that it might be more complicated than just a neighbor casually looking at this would realize, that maybe other boards need to make decisions before a variance is given. I'm kind of confused about that, but it sounds like you're going to speak to your lawyer and figure out whether that's something you can decide tonight or not. I also just want to point out that the people whose property borders Mr. Butcher's haven't been able to get on to into the discussion tonight. I've been contacting them, messaging them and talking to them on the phone. They haven't been able to watch, as far as I know, and they haven't been able to comment. That's what's the last? Conrad's and Walt Fisher. You have Walt Lynn there, but you don't have Walt Fisher. So that's all I have to say right now.
I did receive one public comment.
Do you want to read that now, Ted?
I can do that if you're ready.
Sure, go ahead.
It's
Who's it
from
from?
Linda Banks at 340 North Warren Avenue, saying that she's lived there for 40 years and they already experience heavy runoff in storms at her address, and that this variance will adversely affect her water situation.
Do we have a feeling for that address, whether it's north, south, east, west, across the street? Where are we at here?
I believe she's somewhere right across from Mr. Bradley.
That's right.
Across the street?
Yes.
Yes.
Does that mean on the western side of Warren Avenue?
I
Yes.
think that's correct.
This is Mr. Bradley again. All the neighbors are concerned about the water runoff because of the increasing intensity of storms over the past couple of years and what we expect to be, in the future. That runoff, runoff is a concern already going down Warren Avenue, and we're afraid that this just might add to the difficulties. I'm concerned that the stormwater management plan might not be adequate for the intensity of the storm. So can you assure us that the project won't produce runoff that will contribute to the problems we're already having with rainwater flowing down Old Lancaster and Warren Avenue? And if you grant the variance and the stormwater management plan is built as proposed, but eventually proves inadequate, what will the township do to fix the problem?
Mr. The hypotheticals here get to be difficult for us, and these what you're saying is the dilemma that the zoning hearing board has all the time with this, and we end up, since we don't get to design this water runoff thing other than the fact that the plan in general cannot allow no more runoff than exists now, right? And enforcement of that through the township is the role of all of the citizens in the township, and that becomes a real. We can't. I mean, other than saying the township's going to solve that problem, is about as far as we get to go as a zoning hearing board. You call up Mr. Locker and some other people and complain, and it's up to them to solve that problem. But it's not something that we have to defer to the township and their stormwater management people to solve the problem at the planning and development process, other than to say that we expect them to do that tonight. If we were to grant this, we would expect them to solve that problem. If they don't, They don't. It's a continuing problem in the township. But so we can't, other than saying that it must be solved, that's as far as we get to go. We can't guarantee anything tonight.
I see.
Do the board members have any other questions?
And Mr. Chairman, I believe Walter Lynn or Walt Lynn is also still
Oh,
on
I'm
the
sorry,
line.
Mr.
He's
Lynn.
at 346 North Warren. He was having trouble hearing initially.
Mr. Lynn, do you have a question or comment? Is he still with us?
He looks like he's here, but maybe still muted.
I just prompted him and asked him to unmute. I'm not sure if he's able to see that prompt on his screen.
He's talking, but you're muted. Mr. Lynn, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Zach, can you unmute him?
All I can do is ask him to unmute himself, which I've done.
How about,
Here he goes.
There you go.
There we go.
you got me now?
Gotcha.
All right, Mr. Lynn, when we left off, the initial question that we asked was whether you just have questions or public comment, or whether you wish to be recognized as a party to the proceedings.
I'd just like to comment, I think.
Okay, the board will hear that now.
Can you hear me now or no?
Yes,
Yes.
You can hear me.
yes.
Okay, good. First, I'd like to apologize.
Mr. Lynn, we can't hear a thing.
I think Mr. Lynn might have popped off.
I don't see him on the list of participants.
All of
anymore.
a sudden, yeah.
I'll monitor the waiting room momentarily. If I could just ask everyone else to maybe mute when they're not talking. We are getting a little bit of feedback, and I haven't been able to pinpoint it. I know it's an inconvenience, but
If the board would like, while we're waiting for Mr. Lynn, maybe we can discuss procedurally. It does sound like the board has a number of questions and they'd like to review the record. They'd also like to discuss some of those legal questions with me, which under the Upper Milford decision, the board has full authority to hold an executive session before reaching a decision. So if we were to look into October, the next zoning hearing night, the regularly scheduled zoning hearing night would be October 26th at 7:15 p.m. Mr. Holloway, I understand your client, and we have an exhibit, gave until the end of this month, until the 30th to initiate the hearing, and having done so, you don't have any objection as to timing, do you? If the board were to potentially issue a decision on October 26th? You're muted, sir. Sorry.
Before I respond to that, Mr. Butcher, do you have any objection to granting the board till October 26th to consider this matter and come back with its decision?
No, I don't. We still have opportunity to interact at that meeting, or what would be the layout of that meeting?
It
Would it just be a
depends
decision meeting?
on it depends on whether we hear Mr. Lynn's comments, and then whether the board wants to hear anything further on the 26th, or whether they just wish time to review the record and issue a decision on the 26th.
All right. If I'm fine with the extension.
So, Mr. Rao, just so I understand, so are we saying at this point in time that the continuation until October 26th would not be to allow the applicant to bring forth new evidence at that point in time or new testimony, except in response to any questions by the board.
I think that would be up to the board.
I guess I don't, either we could close the record tonight with, you know, I mean, Mr. Lynn is having problems commenting. I don't know if anybody else would like to comment. They're not on the system here. Other than our, you know, questions to Mr. Rao, that doesn't close, I mean, our discussions with you aren't part of the record, are they? I mean, your opinions of the law?
That's correct. That's if you're reviewing the record and trying to reach the decision for or against, and you're looking for legal advice from your solicitor, that's executive session between now and your decision.
So Mr. Holloway and Mr. Smith, I mean, do you have more stuff that you'd like to bring up in regards to the questions we posed to you tonight?
I think, so if I could just ask Mr. Smith regarding the general character of the neighborhood at present and its development in existing steep slopes. Can you respond to that, Mr. Smith?
Yes, we prepared 2 exhibits at the back of the application that show the existing development of the properties along there. We are the one on the far western side, and all of the lots, there are 10 properties in total that are in the township and in similar size lots than what we are proposing. 9 of the 10 are currently developed as we are essentially proposing, all about 0.4 acres or a little bit larger lot sizes. And they've all been developed. The properties along the eastern end of that in the township or even steeper slope. And you can, the one exhibit you can see by looking how close the contours are. If you could go to the next exhibit, that shows the contour lines. Yes. Those properties over on the far eastern side are much steeper than ours are. In fact, our lot has the least amount of slope than any of the properties going east. So we certainly believe that we can develop those properties, our property. We can comply with the township stormwater requirements, and nobody along Warren Avenue will be directly impacted by any development of our property. The folks that talk tonight are all uphill of our property.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I guess, Andrew, we'll break for executive session.
Excuse me,
Yes.
this is Mr. Fisher.
Ah, okay.
I'm directly west below their property. I have a couple questions. How far?
Mr. Fisher, just so we have the record clear,
339 North Warren.
I'm looking at the notice list. Are you Walter Fisher, 339 North Warren Avenue?
Correct,
All right, and you are on Mr. Holloway's notice list.
correct.
Sir, are you wishing to just make comment, or do you wish to be a party to the proceeding?
Wish to be a party to the proceeding.
Is there any objection for Mr. Holloway?
No objection.
Mr. Fisher, do you have questions or do you wish to testify?
I have a couple questions first.
Why don't we just have you sworn by Mr. Haggerty in case
Sure.
we get into your personal testimony, then you're covered for doing that.
Certainly.
Raise your right hand, sir. For the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Go ahead.
For Mr. Smith, how far is the proposed property from the westerly property line?
You're talking about the building?
Yes, proposed building.
We have the closest point to your property. Well, there's a 15-foot minimum side yard that's required because of the way the house is angled at the extension of your property. The closest that we have, the house shown is about 32 feet from your property line. And there's nothing to a point back behind, which is in the rear setback area.
Right.
But we're allowed to be 15 feet from that property line.
What I would ask is that you build a 3-foot berm along the property line to further impede any water infiltration onto my property, because I'm directly below the proposed building.
Most of that water will be intercepted by the roof drains from the property and will be directed out toward the road. So you'll see less water running off onto your property than before.
You're removing at least 10 trees from the property, which soaks up some of the rainwater. And I just don't have a lot of confidence in your proposal for your drainage. I would like a berm. It can't be that difficult to do with the extra landfill you're going to have, just to put a berm to impede the water coming down the hill.
That water is coming off of an undisturbed part of the lot, number one. And number two, if we did additional disturbance in that area, we would need more disturbance relief from the township.
Mr. Smith, are you saying there would be disturbance to create the berm?
Absolutely, in steep slope.
Yeah.
So maintaining that buffer is probably a little more important than creating a berm, especially that close to the property line.
Okay, I just don't have a lot of confidence in your, with all the rain coming off, not all of it's going to get caught in your gutter. So I'm definitely down below.
You're quite a bit uphill of any disturbance that we're going to be doing.
I'm down.
Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. You're downhill, but that area that we are disturbing on the property is that the area that's going to drain onto your property is primarily undisturbed area.
Mr. Smith, if Mr. Fisher is downhill, Mr. Bradley, if I understand it, is to his south. Is he downhill from the site as well?
I believe he's uphill of the site.
No, he's downhill. Warren Avenue is downhill from the site. We're all on Warren Avenue.
Is 337 south of Mr. Fisher?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think his testimony is his northeast corner of his property touches your southwest corner.
We'll have no water drainage impact on what's called the McQueen property.
Mr. Fisher, do you have any other questions or comments?
That'll be all. Thank you.
I think we've heard from everybody at this point here, Andrew. So should we close the record? Karen, do you have any comment?
Can I just comment on one thing that was stated there, just for clarity? Just as far as the trees that are being removed, there's one tree that's dead that has to come down no matter what, and then one other tree that's likely needing to be removed. And that's just that's just for the roof kind of line, so that it's not hanging over the house. So.
Mr. Chairman, my only concern is I think Mr. Bradley indicated that there was he mentioned Mr. Fisher, who now joined us. He also mentioned the Conrads, who are it appears they're on Mr. Holloway's notice list. What the board could do if it like, would be to ask Mr. Barner or Mr. Locker to post on the township website that the township would accept public comment. We could, I'm just looking at the calendar. We could say
Written comment?
written comment through, say, October 9th, so that at least anybody who wanted their voice to be heard has that opportunity. Mr. Holloway, would you have any objection to that?
I don't have any objection. As long as will we be provided with the comments and have an opportunity to address the comments?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. No objection.
So if we had an opportunity, and presumably Mr. Bradley and Mr. Fisher will let their neighbors know as well, the ones who couldn't connect, but we could post something on the website. Email comment could be received through October 9, and then the board would receive any response from Mr. Holloway through the 16th, and those would be shared mutually. So anyone who participated would also receive Mr. Holloway's response for the butchers, if that works. And then otherwise, the record would be closed if the board wishes, with a decision date for the 26th, and the board could schedule an executive session with me to discuss the full record after the 16th. And we'll announce that date and time of when that was held when you convene on the 26th, and see if you're ready to issue a decision. But Mr. Holloway and his client have agreed that a decision issued on the 26th is timely.
Mr. Rao, can I just ask for a clarification? Has the board accepted all of the applicant's exhibits and evidence?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So exhibits A1 through A6 are part of the record, as are the board exhibits B1 through B5.
Well, and we would
I'm sorry,
ask,
B1 through B6.
and we would ask also that the offer of proof itself be admitted.
And would you like to make that exhibit A7?
That's fine, yes.
Is there any objection or comments from the board to that?
No.
And we do have parties, I assume they would like to see that material, which Mr. Locker or Mr. Barner can make available to anyone who contacts them.
Yes.
So with that, if the board would like to reconvene on the 26th for a decision, and we'll make sure the board sees any additional written public comment, we'll get it to the applicant's counsel, and then applicant's counsel will have a chance to respond in writing the week following. So public comment in by the 9th, and applicant's response by the 16th.
Okay.
And a decision on the 26th.
For this evening, I'd like to bring the today's meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.